Good evening, citizens of Portsmouth, and good evening, colleagues on council. I now call to order the meeting of the work session. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes. Mr. Battle.
Here.
Mrs. Lucas-Burke.
Here.
Mr. Moody.
Here.
Dr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Woodard. Mayor Glover.
Here. And I believe Mr. Woodard is on his way. Thank you, ma'am. And Madam City Manager? Oh, Madam Chief Financial Officer,
Deputy City Manager.
Deputy City Manager. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, would you like to proceed with your items?
Yes.
You have the floor, ma'am.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council, Administration. Today, we are going to begin with a presentation for the Pavilion operations. Would you please step forward? Mr. McDonald, would you please introduce yourself and proceed with your presentation?
Sure. So I'm Ken McDonald, and I work for I'm Going, and we are the operator of the Atlantic Union Bank Pavilion, also known as the Portsmouth Pavilion. We've been fortunate enough to be operating it for going on to 15 years. And it's a real pleasure for me to be here today because I get to give you a presentation that's very forward-looking on what is hopefully the heels of a pandemic, which made our business of putting large groups of people into small places a bit of a challenge. Should I click forward, or will someone? Got it. Okay, and it magically move forward too. So what I want to be clear on is, although I'm standing here before you as the owner of the company, it is a large group effort that puts the shows together at the Pavilion. We have people that do finance, produce the shows, market the shows, find sponsors for the shows, do ticketing, and coordinate the entire event. So I sit here as a representative stand here as a representative for them, but that's my core group that produces the event. And the next slide is our partners. We have a tremendous number of large-scale partners that help us provide shows. Some of them are booking partners like AC Entertainment, Adani Music Group, Creative Nation. Others are security, staffing, concessions, ticketing. Ticketmaster is one, and of course the Atlantic Bank Pavilion. And these companies help us put together a show of some of the biggest touring acts in the country and produce them at the level as high as anywhere in the country. One of the things we're responsible for as the Pavilion in operating the venue and being competitive, and that's a key for our business, is we have to compete. So we're out there competing for shows against all the other cities in the country. Locally it's the Raleighs, the Charlottes, the Greensboros, then you get into DC and Baltimore, but we have to have these partners that can help make it possible. Atlantic Union Bank is what we call a name and title sponsor. They're our number one sponsor. They get the headline billing as far as sponsors go, and then we have a long list of other partners that make this machine go. Much like if you use a NASCAR team or a sports team, we need these corporate partners to help us make the economics of the business work. They also add credibility to the overall venue, because when an artist sees that you have corporate partners like Buick GMC or some of the Coca-Cola, they say that must be a well-established venue. We're happy to come and play there. It's going to be a good day. The management agreement that we have with the city of Portsmouth, it's well detailed. It's many pages. It has been updated on a renewal, which was in 2016, but it contemplates just about everything that could happen and how the venue should be run in this partnership. Our company, we see ourselves as a manager, promoter, and operator of the facility. We manage all aspects of the operation on facility days, except for the physical plant. That is all handled by the city. So plumbing, electric, cutting grass, the venue, that is all handled by the city. We ticket the event, we manage the concessions, we get the sponsors, we advertise, We are responsible for putting the programming together and finding the artists. And most importantly, or to some, we take the financial risk. Not all shows make money. And for us to stay in business, and I've been in business in Hampton Roads for 30 years plus, started at a place on the other side of the river called the Boathouse, which some of you may remember, but that's where I kind of learned the business. But we take on the financial risk. So if a show makes money, we benefit. If the show loses money, the loss sticks with us. It doesn't transfer to the city. The way our rent is calculated and how the city is paid for this is the city shares in revenue streams. So the city shares in, we guarantee a minimum rent. They also get a fee per show, plus a fee per ticket for parking, a paid facility fee that's intended to go for the upkeep and maintenance of the facility, and a portion of the sponsorship. Going back to when this was originally built, and I had nothing to do with it being originally built, but it is a wonderful building, and I'm glad to be the person that gets to operate it. The real reasons for building this come to tax. Frankly, a 10% admission tax, although common in Hampton Roads, is a very high admission tax, but that's where a portion of every ticket, 10% of every ticket, goes to the city. The city portion of merchandise sales tax and food and beverage tax, that comes back to the city, which is a taxes on our food and beverage sales. The other impact of a venue such as this is the indirect impacts, which if we talk to people in the city, they hopefully feel. I know on show days, I can be a hero on High Street at the restaurants, hotels, retail, and providing jobs. And that's where the real impact of why a city would own a pavilion, a ballpark, a stadium. It's really for the indirect results in the economic impact. So far, some numbers between the city and our company is we've hosted 462 events. We've passed 1 million patrons. We've paid $3.75 million in rent, including those other fees. An additionally estimated sales tax and meal tax and beverage tax. And those are direct revenues on how the venues can be maintained, financed, supported. But one of the things that is very important is the pavilion improves the perception of the city and the quality of life for people in the city. Some people in Hampton Roads, their impression of the city is based on who's playing the pavilion. They'll come into the city and they'll drive in, pop out of the tunnel, they'll come to a show, and that'll be their perception. So we see ourselves as an extension, essentially, of visitors, that we can make an impression on people coming to Portsmouth and hope that maybe they'll choose to live here, to work here, to open a business here. So we see our mission as being broader than just the pavilion itself. But so goes us, so goes the city. We kind of rise together. So I see it as very much a partnership. 2021 was a year that we booked without knowing whether we'd be able to do a show in 2021. Most of the booking happens December, January. Now is when we're booking. So at the time that we were putting this schedule together, we really had no idea whether regulations surrounding the virus were going to allow us to perform shows, whether we'll be social distanced, whether we'll be masked, whether we'll be limited capacity. We didn't know, and we made a decision just to move forward and hope for the best. We were able to do our springtime movie series. We were able to work with the city to produce several city events that happen at the pavilion, like the lunchtime bike ride is the first one. We also worked with a company called Diamond Resorts, who hosted some national acts for private events on the site, which they bring a lot of their guests into the pavilion for. It was Chase Rice and En Vogue were two of them. I think there was a third. Yeah, Lee Brice was another one. We did a show with the Virginia Symphony, and then you can see Harry Connick, Rod Wave, AJR. The biggest three shows of the year were Rod Wave, Earth, Wind and Fire, and Erykah Badu. And what's interesting to note is we had done Earth, Wind, and Fire many times before, but it did triple of what it usually does. And we had done Erykah Badu before, and it did between 2 and 3 times of what it usually does. Those were a couple of signals it made to me. Is one, people want to come out to shows. You put a good show out there, people want to come to the shows. Secondly, we have a little bit of the advantage that we were up and running when a lot of people weren't up and running. We took the risk to get out there and get going. We didn't have all the competition and clutter in the market because we kind of took the risk and got moving forward. In the past, we can look at it, 2020, nothing happened because of COVID. 2019, the shows were moved from the venue because we were dealing with the roof renovation. We had hoped that 2019 would be ready. The venue would be ready. We booked it, and then the venue wasn't ready, so we had to relocate all those shows. 2018, it was May of 18 when we became aware of the problem with the roof, and so we had to move some of the shows, but other shows we did without the roof, or we did them in the plaza. So when you look at it, 2017 was actually the last full year for Pavilion operations, and we're counting on 2022 being the next year of full operations. Just going back, these are the list of concerts that played. It doesn't include city events or some of the other non-concert events that we've done. I hope you've been to at least 1 or 2 or 3 of them. So beyond doing concerts, we feel the need to try to utilize the venue as much as possible. We try to keep it available for its primary use, which is concerts, which is what it was built for, to have the best economic impact possible and do its job. But we have done other shows. We've done car shows, beer and wine shows, movies, graduations, and other events, and we're always open to doing more of those to drive more traffic through the venue. So that's a beautiful picture. I think it's iconic. I think when people think of Portsmouth, it's one of the images that they think of is the roof line and the whole overall structure. I tell people, as far as this building goes, it is a first-class building. I would copy it anywhere. It works really well. It's aging a bit. It's coming on 20 years, if you can imagine that. But I would say it is aging well. The state of the industry is such that the industry has been shut down, hampered for the past 2 years because of COVID. The artists haven't been able to work to their full potential. The fans haven't been able to go to shows. There is a pent-up demand. It feels that there's going to be a lot of artists touring, and there's going to be a certain percentage of the population that feels comfortable coming to shows. So I think as the industry goes overall, we're going to see that this coming year is probably going to be a record-setting year in the industry. The challenge of that will be every venue is going to book a lot of shows, which is going to create a lot of competition. And in Hampton Roads, we have a lot of venues. It's more so, it's the nature of our 7 cities. There's a lot of venues, a lot of theaters, a lot of arenas. There's even more being discussed as we talk about what's happening in Hampton Roads. There's plans for a new venue at the oceanfront. There's plans in the works for a new venue at Military Circle. Chrysler Hall will be coming up for renovations, so that may take it offline for a year or 2, which hopefully will reap some of the benefit of them going offline. But as always, our coliseums are aging with Scope and Hampton. They're aging a bit, so we could see some changes along those lines. But one thing that's happening is the industry is always changing. It's going to be busy, and it'll be overall, we'll have a very good, probably record-setting attendance this year is what I would forecast. So far to this date, and it's beautiful. We were able to get the updates in here. Some of this information you're seeing before others that are coming up. The first show of the year starting nice and early. April 23rd will be Jack White. Zach Williams is a Christian artist. Chicago is a legendary band. they still, when you can tell they're legendary when they talk about record sales, 40 million records sold. People don't really sell records now, so that's kind of a signal. Avett Brothers, well-known band, Black Crowes, great rock band, and then another Christian show with Hillsong United. Sitting here on this date with this many book shows, and I've got many more in the pipeline, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone as long as they want about how these shows happen and the whole auction activity that happens is us bidding and negotiating and seeking out these shows. We're in a better position than we've ever been, I think, show count-wise, with the number of shows we've already got announced. We also have city use days on the books, with Umoja Festival being one of them, and the others you can see there. We work closely with the city to accommodate whatever needs there are for the city use days also in the venue. There's one more topic. I won't belabor unless there's a want to get into the weeds on it. Community days. That's when an organization says we would like to use the pavilion. Can we use it? The answer is yes, and the answer is there is a guideline or requirements that the city has provided us with that will make something constitute a community use day. And we go through an application process according to the guidelines. We look at the event. We work with the producers of the event to make sure it's going to be a good event and good for the city, and more importantly, good for them. Make sure that they're not going to lose money on the event, that they're picking the right size venue, because frankly, it's a 7,000 seat venue, and 7,000 seats is a big venue. It's not where you start your concert promotion career or start your event producing career. It is a really big venue, and it costs a lot when you're going to go in there to do sound and lights and security and police and fire and all the other insurance and all the aspects of going in there. It is sometimes cost prohibitive for folks. Also, one of the main criteria for a community use day is it needs to be a free event. And so that sometimes as people want to do paid events, they don't want to pay rent. They assume that everything comes with the venue. And in fact, the venue has no sounds, no lights, no video, no staff. It comes as an empty box. And so all those things are rented for the day. So to produce a show in there is a costly venture. It's, by comparison, Virginia Beach Amphitheater is 20,000 seats. Portsmouth has a maximum capacity of 7,000. You get Scope and Hampton are in the 10, 11,000 range. This is a big venue, and it's a first-class venue, and we're working closely with Bob Baldwin and his team to make sure that we are keeping up on making sure the venue doesn't become obsolete, and we can have good updates to the venues to stay current and stay competitive. And that's my update, and I'm willing to answer any questions either today or even in the future. I'm always available. I'm available for any direct conversations or learning more, because it's kind of a complicated business.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Sure.
We do have a question, Councilmember Moody. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the great presentation, Mr. McDonald. I noticed that you've got 6 concerts booked and more on the way. Are you anticipating that we'll get back to that 14, 15 events per year again during the season?
Without a doubt. And hopefully we can continue to raise that number. The trick to it is we'll get the 15. I'm confident of that. It's just how high can we take that number and do it with shows that are financially feasible to do. But we will be back there to pre-COVID levels this year, unless something strange happens related to the virus, not related to the business.
Right. My next question is, council took a walkthrough of the venue. I guess it was late summer, maybe the fall. I forget exactly when. But you mentioned that it's aging well. there were some things that were pointed out, not now, but at the next opportunity. I think it'd be good to update council on where we stand on addressing some of those aging items and things that need some attention.
Yeah, we're working with the city to create the list. When the venue was built, it went through the standard process of venues where there was some value engineering happened with the backstage and the dressing rooms, and it was done with modulars, and I'm sure you've heard this before with modulars. They have a lifespan, and we're getting near the limit of them, although they're fine. We're getting near the limit of their life, and there's some other structures, merchandise stand, guest services, some of the temporary structures. The seats have been replaced. There's a new marquee. There's been reasonable spending based on the situation that we've been in. And as a good partner, we certainly understand the roof repair came first. The virus is happening. There is other priorities, but hopefully now we can get this to near the top of the priority list.
You mentioned the bump on concert days with the restaurant business. That's absolutely true, especially doing a Friday, Saturday venue. I mean, the restaurants are packed, and that is a good revenue source for the city, in addition to the normal rent and admission taxes.
Yes, as many agents have snapped back at me and said, Ken, there's only one Saturday in a week. They still need the Mondays, the Tuesdays, the Wednesdays in order to get the cities, and frankly, sometimes DC, Atlanta, they may be more likely to get the weekend dates, but sometimes it rolls our way and we're able to get the Fridays or Saturdays. We'll almost always take the weekends first. Holidays play into it too. Some holidays are good, some not so good, but we're always pushing hard for weekends to get as many people to the venue as possible.
Thank you again for the presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Moody. And Councilwoman Lucas-Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, for the presentation. It seemed I learned a little bit here. Of the 6 events that you have planned already for 2022, I guess you said you were going to give us some more information on how you promote or how we attract artists to come, but looking at this list, I don't know if it's my age group, but I don't really recognize anybody on the list, you know, as a group that I would want to go, but,
Sure.
you know, Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, Charlie Wilson, I was at all of those concerts, so, and they produce a packed out crowd, so just wondering how we get more of those artists to be in the lineup. And I see my good friend, we were in high school and college together, Ike Owens, in the audience, so I know he knows how to bring some of those artists in.
Well, Mr. Owens is not one of my, he's one of my not-so-secret weapons.
Okay.
That is always there advocating and helping. I don't know that, I believe it was up there. The criticism, it's a common criticism of, you know, making sure we have something for everyone, and putting a schedule out early, which we don't do, allows people to say, well, there's nothing there for me. So unlike a King's Dominion or a Busch Gardens that may put their whole schedule out first, it opens itself up for that criticism, but this is a different forum. This isn't a marketing forum. This is a council forum. We don't have, we didn't announce the Umoja Headliner, which will be announced, and it'll be someone you're familiar with.
Okay.
That will be headlining the Umoja Festival. I'll go ahead and announce it. It's Chaka Khan, who will be headlining Umoja, because it's one of our obligations is to provide the headliner for Umoja. But one of the things we always look at in this market is to make sure it's just good business sense to have a broad array of talent. If you have too much of any one thing, you're gonna tap that market. So we want to make sure we have a little bit of everything, so people can afford to come. If we have too many of one thing, they start picking and choosing which shows they can afford, and then the good shows will hurt the lesser shows. So we will, by the end, it's for example, one thing that we have been pinched on has been country music. And that's because Patriotic Festival has always taken up a bunch of shows that was in Virginia Beach and now in Norfolk. Virginia Beach Amphitheater has always taken 6 or 7 of the top country shows, and then they usually have 2 or 3 artists with them. And they'll suck millions of dollars out of the country market. And so that's a market that we have to work around. But there are markets, and you can see from even our micro schedule from last year, we were able to get in R&B, pop, hip hop, rock, a little bit of everything, and we will endeavor to do that always.
Right. Well, I'm a fan of all kind of music, so I'll try anything. And then my last question, the 7,000 seats, you say that's our limit or our maximum there, and does that include any lawn seats?
So if we're fully seated, we're 6,500.
Okay.
If we remove the seats in front, the shows you mentioned, I think those were all fully seated. But when we did AJR, for example, the seats down in front were removed. That allows us to take the capacity up another 500 people to 7,000. And when we get around that limit, that's where your restrooms and your fire egress and those things limit your capacity to 7,000
Okay.
because of the seating arrangement. And that's a good number. Even today, going on almost 20 years after it was built, if someone did a market analysis, you would probably still be building in the 6,500 to 8,000 range. So it's still a very competitive range to be in for this market.
And the lawn seats aren't factored into the inside seats?
Right. So you've got 3,500 seats under cover and then 3,000 on the lawn.
Okay.
And that's how we get to the total. And there are cases where we may do a show that's seating only and not do the lawn. I'm more of a fan of opening up all the seats, and if you want to sit on the lawn, you sit on the lawn. If you want to buy the seat down in front, you buy the seat down in front, and let the customer make their choice.
Thank you.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How you doing, Mr. McDonald?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. Just ask some questions. I don't know if you answered before I came in. Sorry to be late. How many other venues is your company associated with?
Well, so if we talk about my history, we have one pavilion that this company operates. I did design, and I'm loosely involved with Ting Pavilion in Charlottesville. I did formerly run Virginia Beach Amphitheater. I did formerly run the Classic Amphitheater in Richmond on the Virginia State Fairgrounds. And I do advise some people on amphitheater design. But as far as operating on a day-to-day basis, this one.
Just one.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, because I just want to make sure that have any, do you incorporate that thought process into what acts are being booked here, because like you say, this lineup that we see, we're just trying to figure out, is there anything else that's going to be added to this lineup?
Oh, yeah.
Are you guys are just looking for tour dates? Because I know sometimes when an artist will put out a tour, it's a little bit easier for you guys to go ahead and insert a tour date into that. So I didn't know if that was affecting your calendar year, but it is some things that, I have some concerns about. I mean, the calendar stay the same. I know about this business a little bit, and we have homecomings here. We have an influx of people that come in the area, and pretty much it happens every year, the same month, same week or whatnot. And are you guys aiming to capitalize on that? Because that could be something that'll benefit our city that we can tie ourselves with, because the pavilion is the catalyst of our downtown area.
Mm-hmm. So we'll look at all aspects of when we're booking a show to decide when is the best time to do it. And please, once again, understand, this is a work in progress.
Absolutely.
We're going to continue to book, and we'll continue to book into July, because then we could potentially book an October show. So what's happening now, for the most part, is we'll have some artists that are proactive and getting out there early. Some of these are family decisions on whether they're touring, decisions based around COVID. Should we go out? Because they're also incurring great expense by gearing up, getting buses, trucks, people. They're a business themselves and heading out on tour. So some artists have said, we're going to wait till 23. Others have said, we're going to go out in 22. But there's another step that happens is Stadium dates generally get announced first, and then you'll get your festival dates that will be announced, because those are bigger dates, better paying dates, the top dates, and then your large amphitheater dates, and then these boutique amphitheater dates will happen timeline-wise. And then like your club activity happens very late. And so on the calendar, it's all coming out, although we're in a weird time, it's a little bit unusual. Some of the standard things are happening. The large music festivals all across are announcing they're booked first, and then we're following based on what the avails are. And yeah, we will look now that they're announcing those to try to surround some of those dates on what they're doing. So some dates are touring dates, some dates are one-offs where we surrounded a date, some are pure fly-ins where they're just coming in for our date and only our date. And then when we go to book, the factors are we look at competition in the market. When we get in the fall, we look and see who's playing football. Is it home? Is it away? What time is the game, if they've announced game times, to see what's happening. There's certain games we don't want to go against with a certain show. Right. It's even NFL time. You know, you look at all those schedules. There's a variety of factors. Graduations can be good. They can also be a distraction, depending on what the show is, because families could be gathering and not wanting to come to shows. So that's part of the art and science of booking.
I got you. I just want, you know, just from a official and you know, part of leadership, the influx of people that comes to our area when all these homecomings and all these colleges have events. Mm-hmm. I just want us to be a little bit more proactive and look at that influx of people and see, can we capitalize on that, you know. And I think that's something that can really help Portsmouth. If you guys can incorporate it in your game plan throughout your calendar year, it's very smart, but so you won't exhaust the people that actually lives here. You know, it's like you say, it's people coming from homecoming. We have people in the Navy and the Army that moves in, moves out. But one thing we know for sure is that people come here for college-driven events, and that's something that you guys can look into. Like I say, so you won't exhaust the locals that are here.
That's
and,
good.
You know,
good point.
Smart planning. It's very
Yes, sir.
smart planning. I also got a question about, I think I love that you guys started off with those movies, you know, last year, to get people back out, to bring their families. I think it was a great idea then. I think it's a great idea now, if you guys can try to incorporate that into what you're doing as well. You know, I just don't want to see it disappear. A lot of families were coming back to downtown Portsmouth and eating in our restaurants and stuff, and you know, we want to continue to keep our city a family-oriented city. You know, so
Yeah, we'll continue with the movies. I like them too. I think they're great family events. It'll bring some people into the venue that, you know, start them young. It's when they're the kids and the families, and it's a reminder that we're here, and they're fairly affordable to execute. We bring in a corporate partner, and we'll continue to do them.
Right. And I also don't want you to be afraid of those weekdays, like you were saying. I know you guys are aiming for the Fridays and Saturdays, but pretty much when consumers are dedicated to looking at an artist, or dedicated, or, you know, fan base, whatever, they'll come out on the weekdays. You know, and I think you guys have been successful with some of the events in the past. And, you know, I for one, I think you guys are doing an excellent job at that, but please don't shy away from those weekdays. And, you know, you probably get a better rate on that as well. So
We try to.
absolutely, I know. So anything that we can grow this calendar right here and continue to keep Portsmouth on the map, make some noise, you know, we are all for it, you know, because tourism is a big thing for us, and you know, it brings a positive image here to Portsmouth. So we're counting on you. We're counting on your team to continue to make us be in that brighter light. So
Thank
please.
you. We want to be a good partner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McDonald, I did have one question. On the page in which you talked about the 10% admission tax on ticket sales, and you said that in Portsmouth, in our venue, that's a little higher. Is it higher in relation to the other venues locally, or what is that?
Okay, so just a quick admission tax, my fast summary on it. When Virginia Beach Convention Center was being built, the old one, they put a 10% admission tax on it. And that's when conventions had $3 charges, $4 charges. And this story may have my bias to it, but when Virginia Beach Amphitheater got built, they had a 10% admission tax. So at the time, I was working for Cellar Door Concerts. We were the company that built the amphitheater and operated it. There was an offset to the rent, which made that tax acceptable because it came out in the wash because of the way the tax was paid versus the rent. Other cities like Hampton and Norfolk looked and said, well, Virginia Beach is 10, we can get there. And so they didn't understand what was behind the 10, and they pushed their rates up. I think Richmond's still at 7, and there are markets that are 0. If you get to Henrico County, where the fairground sits, they're at 0, so that gives them a bit of advantage. And then if you get outside of, you get into some Michigan markets, they're at 0 to 3%. The only market, you could get to Atlantic City, which is 14%, which is much higher, but that's an outlier. But on average, we crept up to 10 in Hampton Roads. When you're talking about shows that if you sell 7,000 tickets and your average ticket is $50, it's a $350,000 gross. It can add up over time, and so that's when it gets up there. But does it preclude us from getting shows? No. Does it help the city by driving tax revenue? Yes. And I think in the wisdom of how the deal was created, it was accounted for overall, with the number one factor being, it's about increasing the activity versus being micro. And we also have a structure right now that complements one another. It encourages me to succeed, and I'm encouraged for you to succeed. Many deals sometimes are set up where there's a winner and a loser. This deal is structured in a way where we win together, and it was wisely done a long time ago.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other questions from my colleagues on council? Councilmember Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. McDonald, I think I see some of your partners up here. Do they have any influence on who you guys put on your calendar or what artists come to this area?
No, ultimately the decision's mine. Mm-hmm. I will make the decision. Influence in as much as if an advisor like Owens said, I think it's going to do great.
I'm familiar, Mr. Ike. I might be one of his proteges.
Mr. Owens, does he influence me? Yeah. If AC Entertainment says, we've had good luck in this place, with this show and other places, you should try it. That's the kind of influence they have, or they say, we did this show in Greensboro and it didn't work, so it may not work. Or that's the kind of influence they have, but there's no, that's just business influence. Ticketmaster doesn't direct or not direct shows to us or anyone else. Our advantage is we're an independent that can work with whoever we want. I work with Live Nation, which is the largest concert promoter in the world. Yeah. Ticketmaster is the largest ticketing company. And then I work with other independent promoters that want to come into the building. I've got 32 years of experience, and I also consult on large-scale music festivals. I work with a lot of different people. I prefer to work here in Hampton Roads because it's where I go to sleep. It's where I want to be. So I use what I learn in other places to our advantage here. And we're able to work with whoever we want, however we want. There's no restrictions on us.
Right. So is your team constructing concerts or festival-like shows that we're having here at the Pavilion, or are you guys just tagging along to tours that the artists are presenting?
So we'll do we'll do every option. We'll go through old lists of artists that we've done in the past and said, I wonder what they're doing now. And we'll try to reach back out to them because it's time to do it again. We'll take incoming calls from William Morris and CAA and Endeavor, and all the other agencies that are saying, these artists are on tour. So our calls, our emails, they go out, they come in. We can't sit in a secondary/tertiary market and wait for incoming calls.
Right.
If you're in DC, you're going to get the call. If you're in Hampton Roads, a few people are going to get the call, and you got to go to work, because these shows could end up in other venues, or they can end up in other markets. And ultimately, money talks. And so we have to have an economic model that we can afford to be competitive, because the act will play Baltimore or Raleigh or Charlotte. They don't necessarily have to come here. We're seeing more and more of artists saying, I only want to play 35 dates this year. And then we've got to figure out how we can be one of those 35 or 40 or whatever their number happens to be. Some it might be 15, and then we have to be competitive. So we can't sit and wait for the calls. We have to come up with creative ways, create models for ideas to do shows and make things happen.
Are we devising a plan to possibly do shows late in the fall or winter?
Yeah, when I started even at the Pavilion, we would run through end of September. And that was kind of it, because weather-wise. For whatever reason, remaining non-political, it's staying warmer longer. And now my date is Halloween, October 31st. So we will continue to book shows later in the year, because there's highly likelihood of having good weather. There's also a factor, like if I can get the show on sale in July when sun's out and it's warm, then people may not be as focused on what the weather's going to be in October. But sometimes if you get it on late, you get a show up late and you've had your first nor'easter, then you might not do as well. But generally, I'll go through Halloween without much hesitation. I think our weather allows for that. The industry kind of moves indoors at that point. Summer tours end, and then they start thinking indoors. But we'll continue through October outdoors.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Moody?
Thank you, Mayor. One more question. In the early days, nonprofits would work in the concession area, and they would get a portion of the profits.
Right.
Is that something that could be revived?
It's always been our practice, and it will continue to be our practice. What's happened somewhat with nonprofits, and hopefully they will recover, is nonprofits are having less interest from volunteers, because volunteers are less willing to go work a concession stand for fear of exposure. And so if you follow college sports and some other, and you saw some feeds of saying, wow, at the Alabama game, it took 3 hours to get in, or at this, this ACC game, the concession line for the Hokies game was, forever long. That's because the volunteer groups, they've kind of weakened and they've dissipated because they haven't been moving along. So hopefully we can get that back going. The volunteer groups are a mission of our concession company. They're a mission of ours that provides them with income, and hopefully they can get their systems flowing again, and people are willing to work those concession stands again.
Yeah, I always thought that was good, because their family members and friends would more than likely come to the concert as well. So I always thought that was good advertisement.
I think it's been a proven model, and it's an interesting topic too, with wages and all the rest of it. But volunteers will be the core of our concessions as long as we can make that happen.
Terrific. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mr. McDonald, for your time, and we appreciate the partnership with IMG Going and the work that you and your staff do.
Thank you all. Appreciate the questions. Thanks for your time.
Yes, sir. Madam City Manager.
Yes, the next presentation will be Shot Spotter, and the Shot Spotter's Community Engagement Director, Mr. Paul John, will provide information on Shot Spotter technology and the potential benefits to the city.
Hi, my name is Jack Pontius. I'm the director for Shot Spotter.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
sorry
Good to
about
see you, City Manager.
You too.
I brought Paul with me, though.
Oh, okay.
All right, Mayor, good to see you again.
Good to see you, sir.
Councilman, thank you for your time. And other city officials, thank you very much. We're pleased to be here. I'm going to go ahead and just a quick introduction. I've been with the company since 2004, and when I started with ShotSpotter, we were just in 2 cities. We're now in over 125 cities nationwide with a big international practice. We are operationalized here locally in Virginia Beach and Newport News, a bunch of cities in North Carolina. DC and Baltimore are close by too. So plenty of references locally. We publish every one of our cities on our website. So you can talk to any of those cities and you'll get a good sense of just the kind of results that other communities are seeing with the use of ShotSpotter. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Paul. He's going to give us his background, and then I'll be talking a little bit about how it works. But before we get there, we want to talk a little bit about why ShotSpotter would be useful and why we might want to bring that to Portsmouth. Paul?
Appreciate it, Jack.
I think this works here, right? Just there we go.
There we go. Thank you, thank you. My name is Paul John. I am the Community Engagement Director at ShotSpotter. And I just wanted to start off, I don't know if any of you noticed there was a guy outside with a bullhorn. I met him on my way in and, you know, just asked him why he was here. And he literally showed me a picture of 3 guys, teenage boys who had been killed within the past few months, and explained each of their stories to me. And then he asked me if I had a son, and I do. He's 2 years old, and I'm looking forward to seeing him turn 20, and I'm hoping that's the case. But that's part of the reason why I took this job at ShotSpotter. I worked in gun violence prevention for at least 8 years, working to reduce gun violence among young black men and boys. And when I got the opportunity to work with a tech company that sends alerts to law enforcement so they know exactly where to go quickly when shots are fired, I took the opportunity. So again, Paul John, Community Engagement Director here with ShotSpotter, and I'm going to get started. So I want to talk a little bit about addressing gun violence in Portsmouth and across the country. 80% of gunshots go unreported. That means that 20% of gunshots go reported. And I don't care what test you take, 20% is failing. But why? Why are people failing to call 911? Many times folks just don't recognize the sound of gunshots. Some people may think it's firecrackers, they may think it's car backfiring. Or some people are just redundant to it. They just hear it all the time and, oh, it's just another gunshot, it's whatever. Some folks know exactly what it is and want to retaliate, so they don't want to call 911 so they could take action themselves. And other folks are resigned to the sound of gunshots, they're resigned to no response, they're resigned to gunfire in their neighborhoods day in and day out. And, you know, when I resign, I'm probably not going to do much myself. Shots fired all night. All of this spreads fear. And this is what folks are afraid of. They don't want to hear gunshots in their backyard, around their neighborhood. They don't want to have to peek out the window at night, try to figure out what it is, where it's coming from. And oftentimes they're looking, they're waiting for a response, waiting to see, are police going to show up? Is somebody else going to call? Oftentimes, if they don't see the response, the idea is the police don't care. And largely because of their race or class. If you're black or brown in this country, if you're working class, you probably don't think the police care about you that much. And they will think that the police are deliberately indifferent to you and your circumstances. What we're here to do is to break the cycle of gun violence. Gun violence continues with the negative perception, community trust erodes. We want to make sure we're protecting officers at the same time. And this specific cycle will continue and continue and continue if folks continue to not call 911, not report incidents, and if there is no response. I'm just going to go. But what if we could detect the sound of gunshots at a moment's notice? We could protect our communities with this technology, and we could connect the communities that are suffering from these gun violence with the resources that they so desperately need to live. ShotSpotter has been in existence for at least 25 years, covering over 120 cities across 820 plus miles around the country. And we will meet or exceed 97, that means we can detect 97% of gunshots that happen outside of the home across the country, whenever a shot is fired. And we have 40 patents. Often when there's a 911 call, because of shots fired, the average range or the average distance from the call to the shots fired nice little graphic there, might be about 780 feet away on average. So that means that when the cops get the call, they have to go to the house, ask questions, and then try to find the shots fired, which could be 780 feet away from the actual house. Meanwhile, someone is suffering and possibly bleeding out and lying on the floor and might die because the cops didn't get there in time. So what is the cost of inaction? And I think some of you already know the cost. Persistent gunfire becomes normal. People just think it's a normal, everyday thing that they're going to go through every day, and they're just going to have to live with it or die with it. And unfortunately, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Without ShotSpotter, you're only getting a fraction. Remember, 20% of the calls, that's all you're going to see. And you can't manage what you can't measure. Up to you, Jack.
Yep. Thanks, Paul. So real quick, just to reiterate a little bit, we give you the what, the where, and the when. We're not going to tell you the who or the why they're shooting or who it is, but we're going to give information that's very important to responders within about 30 to 45 seconds. We're going to publish that alert on their smartphones, the MDTs in their squad cars, 911 and the crime centers, and wherever else you want it, task force. All that happens in about 30 to 45 seconds at the same exact time. And how it basically works is we'll come into Portsmouth and we'll put up sensors. Think about 15, maybe 20 to 25 sensors per square mile up on building rooftops. In some cases, we'll use light poles, but we typically look for those building rooftops to place the sensors. Those sensors work together, right, to triangulate on the location of the actual shooting event. So when a gun is fired, the gunshot is detected, it's located, and then there's a two-step classification process. The machine classification part of the process, where the raw data comes, that's where the calculation is done. It's called a location server. Once it passes that process, and that's in milliseconds, it'll go to an incident review center. We have two, one in the West Coast and one here in Washington, D.C., where we actually have human beings sitting in there doing nothing but looking at these alerts all day long from around the country, listening to the alerts, looking at the waveform, doing an analysis, right? They'll take, a few seconds more, typically about 30 in total, right, before they publish the alert, as I mentioned before. And then that alert will go to the various devices that we talked about. Police will respond. It does not have to go through your 911 communication center first before it gets out into the field. The 911 folks will get it at the same time. They'll know about it, but your first responders are already en route. There's a whole lot of data that we provide on the front end in terms of response, and then a whole lot of data that we provide on the back end. Here's an example of an alert that's 16 rounds. You can see from this aerial view that the 16 is actually in the bubble. That radius there, 82 feet, will give you a radius of where you'll actually start your investigation. To Paul's earlier point, the call-in, if you get a 911 call, which is very rare, is usually a quarter mile, maybe a half mile away. We're going to be like about the size of this area right here, accurate, 10, 20 feet, right? With very exact information. We're going to give you the number of rounds, as you see there. We're going to give you, the who shot scenario. If there's more than one shooter, we're going to be able to tell you who shot first. We're going to give you an indication of the kinds of weapons that could be fired. For example, if it's an automatic weapon, we'll be able to tell you that. If it's a high-capacity weapon, we'll be able to tell you that. We're going to be able to give you information on speed and direction of a drive-by that you're not going to ever get from a 911 caller, because we're accurate to a thousandth of a second, right? Again, we can tell you, of those 16 rounds that were shot, where they came from, and quickly give you a detailed lead summary so that investigators who are responding when they're setting up the yellow tape will have this on scene. And then when they begin their interview process, they're going to be able to ask questions from a position of intelligence, as opposed to not having any tactical information at all about what just transpired. And we break all that out very, very quickly within the first minute or so as police are responding. This information is available. So another one, 7 rounds in a very populated, dense populated neighborhood. Street view is also part of what we provide, so officers can approach tactically, safely, because they know information that they didn't have before. They'll know that it was 7 rounds. They'll know that it was 16 rounds. They'll know there's multiple shooters. They'll know it's a high-capacity weapon or not. They'll be able to respond with the appropriate force. If it's a 16-round event with multiple shooters, guess what? They're going to be calling for backup right away. All that's available, again, within the first minute. We actually have a navigation device on there, so if they need that as well. I have plenty more examples, but I'll just go through this quickly in the interest of time. The application enables you to go back and look at data from 3 days ago, 7 days ago. So if you're an officer that's coming back from a weekend off, or a shift or a vacation, you can go back and quickly see what's transpired in your district or beat. We have a serious heavy-duty customer success team that will be assigned to Portsmouth, just like they are in other locations around the area. These guys are all formal law enforcement, some ATF, a couple directors, federal directors, a lot of local law enforcement executives are a part of our onboarding team and our customer success team. They're all available. We also have litigation support on the back end. As I mentioned earlier, it's not just a response tool. There's a whole lot of information that we provide for investigations that go all the way through the chain of custody right into the DA's office. And we've done a lot of expert witness testimony over the years. We've been successful in the Daubert and Fry cases, so defense attorneys are aware of who we are, and many of these cases are pled out early because of the ShotSpotter forensic evidence that's available and the forensic experts that are available to the prosecutors. Just whip through some of this. We talked about this already. Evidence collection improvements, case closure improvements, response time improvements, saving lives. These are all just examples of results that cities on our reference list will be able to give you. Now, lastly, one of the things that I think that some people are probably thinking is important is whether or not we can integrate with other technologies. And we can. One of the things that we get asked all the time is, okay, what about video assets? Do you guys do cameras? The answer is no. We're just the audio. We're the acoustic experts. We're the guys that get that gunshot location before we can swing the camera over. But you have to have the location of the shooter or multiple shooters, because most of the time cameras are facing the wrong way, right? So we integrate very nicely with video assets, whether it be Ring doorbells or privately owned cameras or city-owned cameras. We can integrate with all of those through their video management system, where we'll send the raw data through to the video management system, and literally within a few seconds, those cameras can turn to where the shooter is or was just a few seconds ago. Possibly get, an aggressive situation still taking place, maybe a license plate with a car speeding away, some witnesses still hanging around the scene, all kinds of powerful information that investigators can use within the first few minutes of an incident. One of my favorites is UAV integration. We're starting to see some of that around the country, drones that are being launched from fire stations and so forth, where now you can light up, right, the actual incident area and follow a car that's a potential suspect or just light up the scene and hopefully get some witnesses that way. But the big one is the video assets. We're seeing some CAD and RMS integration and some drones, but that's still kind of new. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul so he could talk about further integration, not just with technologies, but with collateral programs that you guys might be looking at in Portsmouth.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Appreciate that. As you all know, people are calling for a more robust public safety approach, especially to reducing gun violence. People want to see more than police. I read recently about a group called Big Homies out here that's reaching out to young people to try to make sure that they don't get involved in gun violence. And that's part of what we want to do with ShotSpotter, make sure that we are working with law enforcement to share the data that we're collecting with groups like this and other government agencies so that they can provide the street outreach in a more diligent and focused way. Focused deterrence, so we know exactly who it is we're reaching out to when law enforcement under the groups bring these folks together and say, hey, listen, we know you're doing these shootings. We need you to stop. Your communities are suffering and they're dying. How do we work with you? What do we provide for you so that you can change your life a little bit? And trauma-informed care. One of the things that we're working on right now is trying to introduce or work with law enforcement and schools so that they can take a handle with care approach to students who might be exposed to gun violence. One thing that we realize is just hearing the sounds of gunshots can traumatize you for days on end. So figuring out why a kid might be acting up in school and working with them to decide, okay, we know that you may have been exposed to this gunfire, you may have been exposed to this gun violence. Let's work with you now so you don't end up becoming one of the shooters that we're trying to get off the street. So street outreach, focused deterrence, trauma-informed care are all programs that we're working on building more robust responses for and to, in concert with law enforcement and in concert with the other government agencies that we have in the city. And these are the different levels of adverse childhood experiences that we're looking at as well, from disrupted neurodevelopment to socio-emotional and cognitive impairment, adoption of health risk behaviors. All of these are steps up and lead to a potential early death. And that's what we want to prevent. We don't want kids dying. We don't want kids becoming shooters, and the cycle of gun violence continues and continues and continues. And for so long, ShotSpotter has really just been a tech company, but we're looking to do more than that. I think we showed you some of these already. I just want to refer to this a little bit, is just that because ShotSpotter provides such a robust and quick response time, we save lives, literally. The longer it takes for first and second responders to get to the point of shots fired, that means more blood leading out. That means it's longer for an ambulance to get a victim to a hospital. Then it leads to more death, and we're trying to reduce that time so that folks can live longer lives. Also leads to much more evidence collection, especially if more evidence collection. I'll just stop there. And we want to change the narrative. One of the conversations we hope this will promote is police don't care till the police are there. When 20% of shots fired are called, that means only 20% of shots fired are responded to immediately. But if we can increase that to over 90%, then folks have less of a reason to say that the police don't care and more of a reason to say, oh, the police are there, even if we didn't call. Now, with ShotSpotter, you will detect, again, detect shots fired, protect your communities, and connect them to the resources that they so desperately need. And we can make your community safer. So, I guess now's the time for Q&A. I'm going to invite Jack up, who knows many more answers to questions that you might have than I do.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Paul. Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. My question, you mentioned that you've been in service for over 25 years and that you've had a goal of trying to break this cycle of gun violence. I'm curious, over this 25-year period, have you collected any data that indicates that your software has an impact on decreasing gun violence?
Yes, on our website, you'll be able to see, and I can share this with you, testimonials from cities across the nation that are seeing dramatic reductions in gun crime. I don't have any off the top of my head, but we'll be able to share that data with you, and I can work through the city manager's office. But not just general reductions in gun crime, but a lot of times we look at very specific incidents, like in Detroit recently. I'll just share one example. We had some pushback in Detroit over a period of years. Finally, Chief Craig and the mayor got on board, and they brought ShotSpotter Detroit. And within the first 24 hours that ShotSpotter was deployed, this is public knowledge, they were led by ShotSpotter, first responders, police responders, to a home right in the middle of the coverage area. They had enough evidence at the home to get a warrant. They entered the home and found it's a ghost gun manufacturing facility right in the middle of town. All kinds of weapons, all kinds of cash, all kinds of things going on in there. And in the backyard, there was literally hundreds of shell casings. But no call ever came in from that neighborhood, ever. Can you imagine the fear in living in that neighborhood day after day with guns going off in that backyard as they were testing their weapons? And of course, nobody's calling in because they're afraid of retaliation and other things that we talked about earlier. So the very next day, the mayor and the police chief got up, did a press conference and said, this is what we've been able to accomplish in terms of results. We closed down a gun manufacturing facility right in our own neighborhood. So we have lots of those kinds of testimonials too that we can share, and I'll make sure that you get all of them.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of individual instances where, because it's been reported on the news and cities where the ShotSpotter software has helped in some situations. I was just curious if over this 25-year period, if you've actually have data showing that there's some significant difference and decrease in it, and that's what I'd be
quite
interested.
a bit. There's reductions in homicides, there's reductions in non-fatal shootings, there's evidence collection, case closures that have gone up from like 20% to over 70%, all kinds of different results from that different cities see, and we'll be happy to share those with you.
Right. Well, one thing you did say that I thought that is that would be very impactful in a city such as Portsmouth is that you were making a connection between how there are unreported gunshots in some of these communities and the trauma that has on children. One of the pitches that I think would be good to cities like this is not only the issue of detecting gunfire, but how that impacts on trying to reduce the traumatized children, because when you know where this has occurred, then you can direct counseling
Resources.
to those
That's
situations.
correct.
And I agree totally with what you're saying,
Yep.
that our children come to school traumatized. And I see that as a
They can't learn.
benefit.
You're
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Right, and then the second thing too, beyond just spotting, is that I hear that this provides a great deal of protection to the police.
Correct.
In that they're going into a situation already informed. And those are the type of things, as far as breaking the cycle of gun violence, as long as our gun laws are like they are, that's going to be a tough thing to do. But there are some other areas that I see, like I said, the trauma protecting police,
Yep.
that I think are very beneficial to cities like this. So thank you for
Thank
your
you.
presentation.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. How do you determine the quantity and the location of the shot spotter when you go into a city? Do you use, what kind of data do you
Yeah, we'll
use
do a
for that?
site survey with operations and highly technical experts, that project managers that come in, and we'll look at the topography and geography. And if it's real hilly and lots of buildings and lots of dense foliage and things like that, it might require more sensors. But, you know, we have a service level, a guarantee of 90% detection or better, right? That we don't fall under, or there's financial penalties that we have to pay back to the city. So it's very important for us to make sure that we get it right out of the gate. So if there's a need for 30 sensors a square mile or more, we'll do that. Like in New York City and the Bronx and places like that, where there's a lot of high density of buildings, the sensor density goes up. So in answer to your question, it's all done very systematically with project managers that lead that effort. The city of Portsmouth would not be paying for any additional sensors. You pay on a per square mile basis, not on a per sensor basis or per user basis, right? So you'd be paying the same as New York City or Long Beach, New York, right? Even though Long Beach only needs like 15 sensors per square mile because, you know, they don't have that many buildings. New York City would probably be around 30, 35. So again, it's a per square mile, per year subscription to the service, not a user license, not a user fee, and not a sensor fee.
Also, obviously, we're a military city, and some of our military facilities have outdoor firing ranges. How do you filter those things out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and many cities have that same phenomenon, right, where the firing range is close or even inside the coverage area. So we'll hint that out, and we can literally geographically, like, not cover that. Just put like a wall around it, right, so it doesn't exist.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor.
Is it possible to use your technology with the satellites to also get the visual and audio?
Satellites like that are in space satellites, we haven't actually done that as far as integration, but sure, anything's possible. As long as, you know, we would have a partner that would be willing to accept that data. It wouldn't cost us anything more to send that API, which is a program interface. It's basically a payload that includes Latin long and GPS coordinates, right? And time of arrival, of course. So all that information could be sent through that interface to any of those things that I showed, including drones, video assets, and satellites, I guess so, yeah. We just never had been approached by any company that was interested in that, or any city that was interested in that.
Jack, I did want to make a comment to you. So after meeting you last week at the United States Conference of Mayors, I had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Price in Newport News, where you all are deployed.
Yes, sir.
And he spoke very highly of the program that is being used in Newport News. So in listening to the presentation, I find it, as Dr. Whitaker says, some critical areas that I think impacts can be made are certainly working with our children and identifying those areas, and just reiterating what he said, and ensuring that we provide an additional level of safety to our police officers and our citizens. So thank you guys for showing up,
Thank
as
you.
as you said you would.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Whitaker, sir, you
Well,
have the floor.
With the permission of the city manager, is the chief, is that the chief I see?
Yes.
I would just like to hear some input
Absolutely.
from him in
That's why
regards
he's
to
here.
this.
Can I add something before they leave?
Go ahead. We have one more council member that has a question, and you guys can stand by when the chief comes up, just in case you need to add to it. But if you would answer the question for Council Member Woodard, and Chief, come on up, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I just got a question. Does this technology require cities to increase their police force, because the multiple calls that they'll
Sure.
be getting? I mean, you'll be stretching a stint, just,
Well, it's all about
taking
knowing.
calls that do 2 shots, or
Right.
someone doing 10 shots, and they just stretching our police forces. Do you have any data that shows that may, make us increase our police force?
Actually, it's kind of just the opposite. It actually makes better use of the police sources that you do have. It's a force multiplier effect, because rather than a 911 call coming in from 3 different locations or something like that, where you're sending multiple officers on the same call to the wrong places, right? You can very tactically send a specific unit or multiple units, depending on how severe the event is, to the right location and begin your investigation there. So it does make better use of police resources, not more use of police resources.
Gotcha. And also, I think Council Member Moody, he asked about how many sensors a city like this would need. But, are there like black areas where the data could fade, or if you have too many sensors, you don't get the same amount of data as you get over here, any dead zones?
Well, it's all data-driven, and what we would do initially is sit down with the chief and his staff and do an analysis, data analysis, of where the known gunfire is. And I think the police department has a pretty good idea of where their hot spots are anyway. So those are the kinds of areas, all data-driven, that they'd want to get after first, right? And just so you know, if there's 100 gunshots, it's not 100 shooters out there, right? There's 3, 4, or 5 guys, or girls, or women, that are out there doing the damage. And those are called serial trigger pullers. And those are the guys and gals we want to get off the street as quickly as possible. And that's when you start seeing that dramatic reduction in gunfire, when you get those serial trigger pullers off the street. And the village, the folks in the neighborhood see a more robust police response. The community trust starts to come back, and people start talking to the police again when they see that kind of response at 2 o'clock in the morning, which they haven't seen in quite some time, quite frankly.
And just one more question, Mr. Mayor. Does this have any health concerns? It's a lot of sensors around. Have you guys had any health problems with you guys putting all this technology into different communities?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I've never heard that being a problem in all my years with ShotSpotter. Now, the sensors are up on top of buildings as high as we can get them, and they're listening to bangs and booms that are above the decibel level of the city, so we're not listening for voices or any of that stuff. We're listening to loud, impulsive events only, right? And that sensor, which is basically just a listening device for those types of bangs and booms only, will send that raw data to the location server over a wireless network, right? So, yeah, this is just microphones, some firmware, communication modem, and some other technologies that are in there that make it very unique. But not that I'm aware of that I've ever heard that before.
Okay, just wanted to know so many
Sure.
radio waves or.
No, nothing like that. We don't use radio waves.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
All right.
all like 4G and now 5G.
Absolutely. Thank you.
One question, Mayor.
Councilwoman Lucas.
Sure.
She has a question.
Thank you,
For us or
gentlemen.
the chief?
Okay, we get to.
Right.
Appreciate the presentation and piggybacking on Dr. Whitaker's comment. When I saw the chart that you used from conception to death, thought about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and looking at the top was early death, that was, a little bit alarming. And I know that these psychological effects that are listed here kind of alert us to what kind of treatment or what kind of assistance we may be getting families. But how, is this just a recommendation for the city to work with the schools or for families to go out and seek psychological assistance for the
Yeah,
families?
absolutely. There are recommendations and best practices that we're now submitting to every customer that we have, and making sure that we're not just providing a police response, but we're also providing the second response and allowing for schools to provide some of the psychological care to students that they may need. One of the things that I grew up with was the school to prison pipeline, right? Like knowing that kids will get arrested at a moment's notice for just the smallest offense. But what we didn't realize was that a lot of these kids were being exposed to trauma, exposed to gunshots, exposed to violence that would promote the same violence, the same response. And making sure that we work with the already existing Handle with Care program, so that if a child starts acting out in school, they are then handled with a certain level of care to say, okay, let's step away for a second. Let's talk about what it is that you're going through, rather than calling a school resource officer at a moment's notice or a police officer at a moment's notice to arrest them and then put them back in the same cycle of gun violence without the actual resources that they need. So that's what we're growing into, is being able to share those resources, or at least share the recommendations for those resources, and work with the already existing agencies to decide which programs and which resources are most necessary to respond with.
Thank you for that.
Chief? Okay, Vice Mayor Barnes, you have the floor, sir.
One question is, does it detect fireworks and things of that nature, like July 4th and the other holidays? Does it detect those type of things?
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, we detect anything that goes bang or boom, but we're going to filter out those kinds of things based on our two-step classification process, the machine and then the human review. So we're not going to be sending police officers to firework events, which we call false positives, because if they go to a few of those, they're going to lose interest in the system really fast. And we have a really great track record of filtering out those types of loud noises that aren't gunfire. Gunfire has a very unique acoustic fingerprint. It's very directional, for example, whereas a firework will go like this, the sound, right? Gunfire, when you shoot it downstream, the sensors downstream will detect it too, whereas with a firework, those sensors downstream won't hear it because it's a very small, the sound emanates just about 750 feet, whereas a gunfire will travel a mile, mile and a half. So that's just one of the algorithms that we use to differentiate fireworks and other bangs and booms from actual gunfire.
Chief, could you come forward, please? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Chief Prince, I was just interested in just getting your perspective of this type of technology.
Thank you for the opportunity first. When I was in Wilmington, North Carolina, they deployed that system in the late 90s or early 2000s. We were experiencing the same problems then that we're having now in Portsmouth. When ShotSpotter came out, we'd get shots all over the city at first, and then they started coming back and they started reducing. They started reducing because there was a penalty for pulling that trigger. It's easy to pull a trigger when you're unknown and your location is unknown, and that's what it was. There was no repercussions at all. But when that system came into place, it became known quickly. We made several arrests. We did save some lives, as they said. We found the crime scenes quickly. In some cases, I can remember one distinctly, it kept us from looking bad as a police department when we found a body, unfortunately we got there late, that had fallen behind a hedge. They say, y'all said 82 feet. In my experience, the system that we had in Wilmington would put you within 3 feet of where the shots were fired because we found the shell casings right there and we would dial in. One of the positives with the system is, let's say you have Officer Smith who's driving this way. Shots are fired back here someplace. The system will get it, analyze it, kick it out. I know what you guys are saying. In about 30 seconds, we would get that dispatch on our computer. It would light up, street map, location, and every police officer in the city would get that alert. Everybody knew exactly where to go. We would go, and I'll say in our instance, without fail, we found casings, a person, someone shot, or someone dead. It worked tremendously for the city of Wilmington. I know you're saying 97%. I'll go along with that. They're in the high 90s. You asked about sound. Mr. Moody, yes, there is sound that comes with that system. They didn't play it. You guys really should have played that. The shots will go off, and during that system, their acoustics will record it and play that back. The officers can listen to that on the playback. They can actually hear the shots that are being fired in the neighborhoods that we have coverage on. If it's 5 shots, you're going to hear 5 shots played back from the location that they were fired from. They spoke about identifying, you may as well say the caliber of the weapon. So we know if we're going into a heavy gun, a submachine gun, AK-47 versus a 22 or a 40 caliber handgun. That's a big difference. So you know I don't need to go right up on this scene. I need to tactically approach that location. I'm all for the system. The thing is, we have people in our city right now that are firing those shots, and they know nobody will probably call, or it's going to take us a long time to get there. If we're getting those calls immediately and everybody knows, they are going to go to those calls. They're going to go to those shots fired versus dispatch getting the call, if they get it, loading it in the system, handing it over to the actual dispatcher, looking at the board, finding an officer that's in the area that's free, and sending that officer to the location. So shot spotter, 30 seconds, roughly. Let's call it a minute, just be gracious. Giving it to the dispatcher, if they get the call, questions, process, enter, transfer. You're talking about a 4-minute process, and that's fast. And then they find that officer, and that officer is going to go there versus every officer in the city, including the one that was 2 blocks away, knowing immediately to go to that location. It's a win for us, and we can show people that are pulling the trigger without any repercussions that now you have to pay the price because we know that you're there, and we're going to get there, and we're going to get there quickly. And it is a plus for the city. I think it will help reduce the amount of homicides we have. I think it'll help reduce the number of shots fired calls that we have when people are just shooting for no reason whatsoever.
Thank you, Chief. That was very insightful and helpful.
Thank you.
And Chief, one other thing, we do already have those areas, some of those areas identified with our current data. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We are operating under 21st century policing. We are tracking everything as far as violence goes in this city, as far as shots fired, homicides. We have what we call hotspots, and we concentrate all of our resources on those areas. Sometimes to our own detriment, we pull resources in, but that's where we need to be. We're going to expand back out, but yes, we do have that data that they're going to need to know where to start looking at, and then they go in and set things up from there.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Councilwoman Lucas-Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Right. Thanks, Chief. You mentioned that there were some fines or some fees that were assessed on the people, or the location.
No, ma'am. I said, when I said they had a price to pay,
Right.
that's because they pulled the trigger, and we can actually get there and do something versus not knowing.
Okay.
And that's the big difference. When they know, and they did, the people in Wilmington, our people that were causing those problems, it's just like here. We weren't answering because we didn't know. It had become the norm, and shots fired around your house is not normal. So when we started responding, they figured it out pretty quick. And it worked so good until they turned that system on us because we had a learning curve. It was so effective that they said, okay, if I don't want the police here, let me send somebody over to the other side of town and pull the trigger. And it would have forces over there. Well, we had to reteach and say, maintain the integrity of your district. You don't go unless we send you. Let the units that are in that geographic beat handle that call. It was a small learning curve. We learned quickly and we recovered, and it maintained effective. I think my brother-in-law, Donnie Williams, the chief of Wilmington right now, is still maintaining that system, and they rely on it heavily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, gentlemen. Madam City Manager?
Yes, the next item is discussion regarding the Southside Network Authority, the funding level. This discussion will be led by Assistant City Attorney, Ms. Kelsey Swearingen.
Thank you. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. My name is Kelsey Swearinga, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Southside Network Authority contribution in a follow-up to your previous meeting. I'll make it brief because I know we're pressed for time here. You can see here, this is the map of the regional fiber ring that we're talking about building. It goes through all the Southside cities, and importantly, it would go right next to our ring, and it goes to the internet hub in Virginia Beach. Some reasons why it's a good idea for us to have this rings, why it's good for Portsmouth. First and most importantly, it's the most economical way we can connect our ring to that internet hub in Virginia Beach. And that's good for the city because it means that the city can power its ring and satisfy its own municipal internet needs by accessing the extra vendors that are available for internet needs in the internet hub in Virginia Beach. Because right now, to power our ring, we basically have one option. So we're kind of limited on cost to what that one provider offers. But when we hit the internet hub, we have a plethora of options, so our cost goes down for our internet needs. Additionally, because we had that direct connection to the hub, it makes our own ring more desirable for any third parties that want to lease space on our ring. So for the Portsmouth Broadband Authority, if they want to lease out space on their own fiber ring, those companies, data centers, or internet service providers that want to lease that space have a direct connection to the Virginia Beach Internet Hub. So it makes our own ring more desirable. It makes city data safer. And it does also help with public safety. It will connect all of the Southside localities together, and that includes their 911 call transfer operations. So if you're trying to transfer a call between cities, you'll have better connection. And it's better for the region. Companies that have large data needs that are looking at what region they might want to locate headquarters, they'll see that Hampton Roads has strong fiber backbone, and they might be more willing to locate here in Portsmouth than somewhere else. So if we're going to contribute, really there's only two contribution levels that would make sense, and that's either the $3.5 million for 14 shares or $5 million for 20 shares. You get a different number of fiber strands for each of those contributions, either 2 pairs or 3 pairs. There's not a big functional difference because we don't need 3 strands, we only need 2 strands, and we can't lease or sell that extra strand pair to anybody else. So the real difference between these two comes down to your vote percentage on your project committee and your share of profits and losses. The project committee, which I'm going to go over what the project committee has domain over in the next slide, but your voting percentage on that project committee is based on your contribution. So if you have 14 shares, you have 14% voting power, and if you have 20 shares, you have a 20% voting power. Right now, it looks like the other Southside localities are probably going to be putting in for 20 shares each. So that would mean that if Portsmouth puts in enough for a 20% share, all the localities will probably end up having an equal vote. If you put in for 14 shares, realistically, either one locality is going to have a 26% vote, or maybe 2 localities will have a 23% vote. But in either of those circumstances, you'd still need at least 3 localities to vote for something to get a majority vote, just with the way the math works out on that. I can't guarantee that that would happen. It's possible that another locality will also put in less than 20%, and then you could have a locality that has even greater voting power, but just reading the tea leaves, it looks like everybody else is putting in enough for 20% stake. And then you have the difference of your share of profits and losses. Profits are all theoretical at this point. It's possible there could be a lot of consumers on this and it would generate enough revenue to pay for all the costs and maybe have some profits. But right now, the authority isn't really looking to be a service provider, an end service provider. They're more looking at leasing dark fiber space. That doesn't mean in the future they won't be a service provider, but right now, dark fiber, it would certainly bring in revenue, but it's not a huge moneymaker. As for cost liability share, right now, the ring is projected to have an operational cost of about $750,000. And that would start taking effect after the ring is constructed, after it's turned on. So for a 14% cost share of $750,000 is $105,000 a year, and then the 20% would be $150,000 a year. But that would be offset by any revenues generated by the authority for leases and such. So for the voting percentage, that project committee I was talking about, it would be one of essentially two voting entities that comprise the SNA. So right now, the SNA has a board, and each locality has an equal 20% stake on that board. So each locality has an equal vote. The project committee will be determined based on your contribution. The board's duties are to vote on the overall authority budget. So it's going to decide how much the project committee has to work with, for example. The board has to approve any debt or obligations of the authority. They have to approve real property agreements, so that would be franchise agreements to build in the right-of-way, for example. And they establish the general dark fiber lease guidelines. So they would establish the general terms and conditions and the leasing rates that would apply to all dark fiber leases. The project committee, on the other hand, is more of a day-to-day operations. They manage the project funding, and that includes procurement. So all procurement issues are going to go through the project committee. They also manage operations and maintenance, and again, the procurement to procure that service. They obtain construction permits, and they approve the individual dark fiber leases. And importantly, that also gives them the authority to, in certain circumstances, deviate from those guidelines that the board approves. So if there is a good business reason or a good community development or economic development reason, the project committee could approve a dark fiber lease that has a slightly different lease rate or slightly different terms and conditions from the general ones that the board has approved. The other item that I know you were looking for was the minority participation plan that applies to this construction project. And the answer to that is they don't have one, because the SNA uses HRPDC's policies, and HRPDC doesn't have a minority participation plan. What they do have is a SWAM DBE plan, which is not exactly the same thing, but their SWAM DBE plan is an overall goal of 6% for all contract and procurement activities, and that would include subcontracting as well. So with that, I'd take any questions.
Councilmember Battle, sir, you have the floor.
You said there's a separate entity that handles the procurement system?
The project committee is part of the SNA. It's
Right.
just like a different committee within it from the board itself.
Right. But who is the project committee?
That would be all of the localities who contribute to the project are part of the project committee, and then their vote on that is based on the their contribution level. So that's when we're talking about the difference between 14 and 20.
So in essence, the boards for each area would be that committee?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah. My concern is not so much of the numbers that are being presented for the votes, and this isn't directed just to you. My concern is this whole concept of regionalism, and this project has been on the table, I think, since 2018. With a master plan that came out around December. And my concern is that this whole concept of regionalism does not necessarily equate to what is best for Portsmouth. And I think too many times we've gotten caught up with a non-existing entity, regionalism, when we know what we have with our city. And I say that because as I look at the regional effort with the jail, that didn't pan out well. The regional effort with SIPSA and the trash collection, there's still some issues with that. And this whole regional transportation with the tunnel, and it's just that this concept of regionalism does not, to me, deal with the everyday issues that the citizens in Portsmouth are facing. I noticed that this effort that we put into developing a Portsmouth network, I thought I heard last week that there was something like, was it $10 million that we invested in our local network? And so you're saying that that $10 million investment now without the South Side network is not efficient, and that's what I'm having an issue with. I read the master plan from 2018, speaks a lot about generating revenue for the region. And again, I don't know if that equates to what's going to benefit Portsmouth. With the issues our citizens are facing, I'm not sure investing that $3 million or $5 million is the most efficient use. And I still have not seen the benefit. So when you say that it's a savings, I haven't seen any figures showing what that savings is. Okay? When we talk about it's going to be more efficient for a business in Portsmouth to connect to this ring, is this wireless service? The ring, is it wireless?
No, it's a fiber connection, so.
Okay, so therefore, with that connection, are you suggesting that the only way a business could connect to the hub there in Virginia Beach would have to be through the Portsmouth ring and then to the Virginia Beach ring? Is that what you're saying?
If they located in Portsmouth and they were close to our ring, then yes, they would go through our ring, through this regional ring to Virginia Beach.
So there are no wireless options that the SNA is pursuing. This is purely all fiber optic.
At this stage, yes.
Yeah.
But let me address some of your other concerns. First of all, the ring the Portsmouth ring itself, the one that we invested, I don't recall offhand the exact figures, but $10-ish million. That pays for itself in 10 years. We can do nothing, and 10 years pass, it's covered, and the lifespan of that is at least 20 years. So it'll pay for itself in 10, and then over the course of the next 10 plus years, there's just going to be a cost savings for the city. And again, we can do nothing. The advantage of this ring is getting us to Virginia Beach. So we had previously looked at what the cost would be if we just went out on our own and built a connection from our ring to that internet hub in Virginia Beach. And it would be, I forgot what it was exactly, but it's certainly more than the $3.5 million contribution level that we're looking at here. And we get to share in the costs with 4 other localities. So that's why it's the most economical way of making it to that internet hub. And then once you're there, like I said, it makes our own ring more attractive for businesses to locate on because they have that direct connection to the beach. And also our own internet costs could go down further by having the extra vendors available there. So there are still, while it's going to be advertised as a regional benefit, that's just because it's a regional entity that's kind of overseeing it, so they like to pump up the regionalism, but it does still have a lot of benefits for Portsmouth itself.
And then my last question, because of time, in the master plan, it gave some indication that there are other sources of funding from the private sector, as well as the government with grants. Mm-hmm. And so why are the cities being pursued for funding and not these sources?
Well, for the government grants, They have tried to get some government grants in the past. Up until very recently, most broadband grant funding has been for rural localities that have no current broadband internet connection. Very recently, with some of the ARPA funds that have come in, that's opened up a bit, and they are looking at getting grants that would then help offset these costs, and then if the costs are offset enough, they could return money back to the cities. As for private money, that would have to be through a public-private partnership, and the entity did look at doing a public-private partnership for construction instead of a more traditional system, but they ended up deciding that they wanted to go the traditional route because essentially any public-private partner wanted to own a portion of the ring, and they just weren't interested in giving up that type of control.
Thank you.
And if I may add to Dr. Whitaker's question, as I was at the United States Conference of Mayors, the president did come and talk to the group, and they did issue a white paper on some additional funding that will be coming to the state and local government for broadband projects. So there potentially could be some more dollars.
Were they, did they say approximately how much they're looking at?
I have the information. It wasn't a specific dollar amount, but they were talking about the programs. But I have the information, and I was going to share with everyone once we gave it to the city manager.
But also, this is an item on tonight's agenda because you were able to defer it last time because they extended the timeline for the bid. But tonight is essentially when that decision has to be made. So I believe, yeah, that is an item on the agenda, but it's up to you to determine exactly what contribution amount.
Yeah, and
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
That's my other issue with this too. Okay. So all these millions of dollars that are about to be spent through taxpayers and the minority participation is not there. But yet they come to a city like Portsmouth, majority African American, and want us to put our dollars in it, but yet we can't participate in the contracting process. And somehow we expect to benefit from that. And I just don't buy that. I don't buy that. I think, again, I think it's more creative things we can do to help our citizens than putting our dollars out here in this regionalistic effort that has not given us the returns that we have expected in any of our projects. And so, like I said, that's not I'm not directing that at you, I'm just speaking it out at large, my thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Waranga. City manager, I would like to pose a question before you and to the city attorney to Ms. Waranga's position on the vote that is required. Is that vote absolutely required that we make tonight?
That's correct, based on the timeline that we've been provided by the SNA.
And what potentially happens if we don't do that?
If you don't do that, then the bids were only extended out to February 1st, I want to say, and you still have to, so you could lose the current bids, which are based on prices from early last year, and the prices have gone up for materials and labor have gone up substantially since then.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
So Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, sir.
So to our city manager and whoever else sits on these, so when these issues like this come up with procurement spending, and you see that we have been ignored, particularly African-American contractors have been ignored in the process, who raises a question about that?
We do.
So so you're ignored?
Well, I've just recently got on the board, and to your point, a lot of these regional agreements we have, we're looking at them differently, and we're being more vocal about things like that. But if we're one of 5 votes, then we're in a minority position. So we're trying to ensure that our position is known and on the record.
So if we're one of 5 votes and we're putting 3 to 5 million in there, are we just being pimped and subsidized, by other cities to help further a project that we don't have a voice on, nor do we have a participation in? That's my concern.
I totally understand your concern, and in this case, it's one where we've done the analysis to look at what it would cost the city to try to obtain this level of access to the hub in Virginia Beach, and the cost was in the $6 to $7 million range. So because of that, and we know that from a 911 perspective or communication between cities for emergency purposes or what have you, that we need to be a part of the South Side Network.
Council Member Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Ring has done an excellent job in presenting the details of the plan, but my question is to our legal department. You've looked at the agreement, and knowing our past history on the agreements with the regional jail, with SIPSA, what are your concerns with this agreement?
Councilman Moody, Mr. Swearinger is more familiar with the contract, but yeah, my concerns, first of all, I wouldn't call SIPSA a failure. SIPSA had some rough times, but is doing very well now. Regional jail is a different story. My concerns here would be very few, quite frankly. I don't like that it doesn't guarantee minority participation. I don't know how we can change that in any great way. But overall, I think it's a winning situation for us because of the cost savings, which I think maybe Daniel Jones could get into, or Assistant City Attorney Swearinger can get into. But there's huge cost savings over a number of years because we don't have to rely on Cox Cable only. There are other providers if we tie into the Virginia Beach network. And be aware also that Virginia Beach network, it's just not the region. They've got a line going under the ocean all the way to Europe. That's what we're tying into. That's part of the Virginia Beach network. So that's huge also. So I don't have that many concerns about from a legal perspective, other than we only have 1/5 of a vote. But so do the others. And the 14% on the one committee is not that damaging because nobody's going to have a full majority anyway. And so I'm not as concerned with that. But overall, I don't have many concerns. I don't know if Mr. Swearinger has any concerns from the contract itself.
One problem that we're facing now with the regional jail agreement is the cost to exit the agreement. What would be the cost? Say, I think Mr. Ringa said in 10 years is paid for, and the lifespans for another 10 years. So in 20 years from now, if we wanted to get out of this agreement, explain to me how we could exit the agreement. Not only at the end of 20 years, but say in 10 years.
Sure. So just to clarify, that 10-year, 20-year, that's for our own fiber ring.
Yeah.
That's not about the other one. But for the SNA, it does provide exit provisions, which are essentially you put your shares up for sale to the other entities, and then, or to the other entities, excuse me, to the other localities, and then they can purchase your shares and buy you out. If you don't have if you don't have localities who are willing to purchase your shares, then you would have the same problem you would with any sort of regional agreement. But it does provide an option to get out in that way.
Well, if our shares, does it enhance their voting position? What would induce them to buy our shares?
Because it would enhance their voting position. So if we bought 20 shares and then decided to get out entirely, and let's say Virginia Beach wanted to come and buy up all of our 20 shares, they could have a 40% vote, for example.
Okay, so that would be the inducement for them to,
Right, and if there are any profits, for example.
so it's no other penalties or fees to exit the agreement?
Not as long as you have another locality willing to buy you out.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yeah, Attorney Strawberry, isn't it a fallacy in assuming that just because there are equal shares, equal votes, doesn't that assume that each of those cities have an interest in the whole versus some of those cities may have interests that may not align with Portsmouth, and therefore they may, although we all have individual votes, that doesn't preclude them from getting together and collaborating, and thereby they outvote us, which is what we're seeing happening with the regional jail now, that we can't get out of it unless it's unanimous.
Yeah, and that's the way the regional jail agreement was, that it had to be unanimous to dissolve it. We don't have that in this agreement. But you're right, you're right. Three cities, it's a majority rule, so,
Right,
and that could counter to Portsmouth, just like Portsmouth could get together with Suffolk and some other cities and do something that Virginia Beach doesn't like. So, yeah, you've always had that, Dr. Whitaker, and so it's difficult to predict where the alliances are going to line up and so forth, if any. It could be that everybody benefits and everybody's happy and it works out also.
I'm just saying, based on past history, that alignment has not favored Portsmouth. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, with I wouldn't use the Hampton Roads Regional Jail as a model because they've got that provision requiring unanimous vote, every member to vote, every locality to dissolve that authority.
Well, I'm just really talking more too about the use of it.
Of the jail?
Right.
Oh, yeah, it's outlived its purpose, and we're trying to, and you may have seen my memo on that, we're trying to resolve that and hopefully make that the Portsmouth City Jail, at least part of it, the Portsmouth City Jail. Mm-hmm. We're going out for a tour Friday, although I think I've got to be at the state legislature, so I'm not going to be able to go, but we got the engineer going out there, and we're going to look to see if we can make that the Portsmouth City Jail. We had hoped to lease bids, make it the whole thing the Portsmouth City Jail, if it was acceptable to the sheriff and so forth, and lease bids to Hampton and Newport News. They're not agreeable to that, and so they want to keep either the authority or split the jail in half and keep their side. We also have to insist, and we're getting off this topic here, but we have to insist on mental health treatment over there too, but that's in the works. And that's a little different situation than this contract. But I understand your concerns. We can be outvoted by a majority.
Mr. Battle, would you like the floor, sir?
I think this is a good deal because it affords us the opportunity to have businesses to come in who have large amounts of traffic going in and out. And there could be, and very well be, funds made from this alignment. And as far as the collaborative efforts, any three can get together, but the bottom line will be that the funds have to be distributed equally. And if they're going to monopolize, which they very well may be able to monopolize the setup, it very well still has to benefit us equally. And because of the interest in our city and the different pieces that are in place and all the folks calling to try to come, I think it behooves us to join forces here so we can have the traffic to accommodate those large industries, and, such as banking systems. In Manhattan, those folk have an awful lot of traffic holding their customers' funds and so forth. By adding this, the finance companies and all of the big conglomerates that have a lot of traffic, we'll be able to accommodate them. We already have all the other attractionable parts to our city, but you can attract it, but if you can't accommodate it, they can't come here. So by joining forces and with this ring, we'll have the traffic to accommodate almost any business or industry that'll come our way. And I favor buying the whole 20%, because why would you start at the onset with someone having a greater portion of control than you? So I'm 100% for this. I understand minority participation, and I'm very cognitive and always have that on my mind, but this is to benefit the whole city. The little children that we're talking about, the adults, the seniors, we could very well, through this, get to a point where we could roll back the taxes. It's unlimited potentials in this. And sometimes I understand all the concerns that my colleagues have, but this is the future. And are we going forward? How are we going to sit back? I'm for getting all the stock we can get and full participation. If there are some agreements or, in the contract that are benign to us, I would want you to let us know, and we could possibly get them changed.
And I believe everybody does have the copy of the contract.
Thank you, sir. And Councilwoman.
But even though we have a copy of the contract, it's the attorneys. The bottom line stops with our attorneys. Yes, we can read it, but we're not registered, licensed, practicing attorneys. That, you can't throw that on us. That's on our legal department. And what all we are saying is make sure there's no rough edges in the contract that will put us at a disadvantage. Yes, we can read, we can do this, but that's your job. You're the professional there.
Thank you, sir. We have time for two more questions. Councilwoman Lucas Burke and then Vice Mayor Barnes. And we have time for two more questions. We have time for two more questions in the interest of time, and then we're going to, because we have a meeting to start and we're already 5 minutes behind. So, Councilwoman Lucas Burke, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Attorney. I know that we're going to put this before a vote, but one of the concerns we had was the $10 million investment that the city of Portsmouth has already made. Does any of that amount transfer into the amount of shares that we would not have to pay for? I know that was a question that we had.
Right, so the amount that we've already invested, that's in our own ring, and we're not giving any ownership up in our own ring. As part of that construction, we did put in, there's a small section of our ring where it's going to overlap where this regional ring comes in, and because it was of this almost no cost to us, we put in some extra conduit, which is what the fiber casing is essentially, with the idea that the regional ring might end up using that conduit. So there are provisions, if they end up using that we can get an in-kind contribution for that conduit back. But that amount would have to be decided by a expert consultant, and we'd look at that time.
Vice Mayor Barnes, sir, you have the floor.
As far as businesses being able to operate in Portsmouth and efficiently, if we don't buy into the ring, is that what will happen?
I think that if we don't buy into the ring and enough other localities pump in enough extra funding to get it built, our businesses won't really be affected. They could still buy into our ring and this regional ring and reach Virginia Beach. The problem is if we don't put in a contribution and the other localities don't pick up the slack, then this whole project could fall apart and there would be no regional ring.
So in essence, to kind of speak to what Dr. Whitaker was talking about, that kind of gives us some leverage if we don't buy into it.
I suppose, but now we're running into the problem where if we don't do a contribution tonight, then the bids will all expire, and we'd have to, if you restart the process, because of COVID, the prices are extremely high right now. And so instead of looking at 3.5 million and 5 million, I don't even know what prices you'd be looking at, but it would be a lot more than that.
One more question, Mayor. What is the likelihood, if we don't buy into it tonight, that it will stop the project?
I'm sure it will at least delay it, and you'd have the problem with the bids expiring because the resolution includes signing this participation agreement, and if we are not in the participation agreement, all the other localities have agreed to participate in that participation agreement as well. So it would, again, kind of restart the whole process.
In the interest of time, I'll concede my time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Swarenga, for your input today. We do have a need for a closed session, but in the interest of time, I would ask my colleagues on council if we have time at the conclusion of our regular meeting, is it the pleasure of council to go into close for that discussion? Could I get a show of consensus by a show of hands? Okay, I just wanted to pose that to the council, and if we need to determine a consensus up or down by a show of hands, whether if we want to go in, I'd like a show of hands. If we don't, you don't have to raise your hand.
Well, I guess, quick question to the attorney, how pertinent is it that this be discussed tonight?
You know, I think it can wait. I think it can wait 2 weeks. I'll be happy to talk to that individual's attorney and try to resolve as much as we can that way. But I don't think 2 weeks would be a big difference.
Thank you, sir, and thank you. So with that, we will wait to go into that closed session at the next council meeting. Madam City Manager.
In the interest of time, and I only have one city manager's report, so we can.
Thank you very much, Madam City Manager, and we will forego the city liaison report. With that, this work session is adjourned. We'll take 5 minutes to get ourselves together and reconvene at 7:15.